we welcome you this morning, and for all the fathers out there watching this Sunday, happy Father's Day. Hopefully it's been a great start of your day so far. Let us pray so we can worship with everything we have this morning. Father, we thank you so much for your love, your grace, and your mercy, Lord. I thank you for being the one true Father, the good Father. I thank you also for giving me a good Father. And so, Lord, what I want to do this morning, what I want to do every morning when I wake up, I want to shift my focus on you. Fill this room and fill the homes that are watching this morning with your Spirit. God, you are in control, and God, let us worship that this morning. We ask this in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. felt no worth. You paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Though it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it, till you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
Father, once again we come to you this morning, and Lord, we thank you so much for that overwhelming, just all-consuming love that you've given us, Lord. Lord, I pray as we open up your word this morning that you speak through us. You speak through another parable that Jesus shares with the people of Israel. And Lord, I pray that the rest of this service and any service we have just glorifies you. That we can make much of you, and we can make much of the love that you've given us. And we ask this in your Son, Jesus Christ's name, amen. Thank you, Amber. Three of my favorite songs. For you out there celebrating your fathers this morning, and the ones that maybe raised you, we know that being a father just isn't always biology. It's not genetic. It's a celebration. The Father's Day is a celebration for those that raised you. And there are some men out there that took it upon themselves to raise kids that weren't their own, just like them. And you celebrate them this morning. I'm going to celebrate my dad, and going to probably eat with him and then enjoy him. But for you that may have lost your dads, take some moments to celebrate them in your heart this morning. Before I get going, just a couple quick announcements. We'll be back this week for our midweek checkpoint, and then the next 2 weeks we'll actually be worshiping together. They're listed on our website or on our social media as to be determined, but I'm pretty sure the 28th, we'll probably just have it out here, but this time we'll do it in the shade. I promise. We'll do it here on the side here, and we'll do it in the shade, and that way nothing shuts down on us. And then on July 5th, that one's to be determined. We're waiting on some things for that, and we'll let you know that very quickly. When I was growing up, this is going to sound really funny, but my grandma, my dad's mom, had a lake house at Lockingren. And when I was growing up in the 80s, Lockingren wasn't what it is now. If you go out to Eaton right now and you drive around Lockingren, it's going to look no different than the subdivisions here in Carlisle, Middletown, wherever you're at. It just looks like a subdivision of Eaton. But when I was growing up, there was just a few houses out there around the lakes and the ponds and the pools. And we would go out every summer. My grandma owned this A-frame, and we would go out and kind of with the other families, and then we would have it just to our family. And it was a great time going out. We'd go swim at the lakes, at the pool. There was a little go-kart out there. I remember one time I was riding with my cousin, and he threw me off the go-kart, and it ran over my pinky. I don't know why I remember that, but I remember that. But there was always a good time. But eventually, the longer that me and my sister would be there with just each other, like most kids that age, these words would come out of our mouth. We're bored. Right? And just like Brody and Lily, we're bored. And they have way more stuff now these days than we did growing up. I sound like a very old man saying that, but when we got bored at Lockingren, we would play some card games, and then when we got bored of playing card games, we would build a house of cards. We would build a house out of cards, and I remember because we'd always try to see who could make it the biggest, and everybody always tried to make it different. And I was kind of a triangle guy at the base, and my sister was kind of like 2 cards and 1 on top, and it was just kind of what it was. And we tried to build the biggest house of cards that we could. And here's what was so funny about when you build a house of cards, or the other day Lily was playing with plastic cups, and when you kind of see it like that, you have to understand that it takes twice as many cards to build the foundation as it does the top, right? And so I remember building those houses out there, and I remember that you could almost use, depending on what the size of your house would look like, if you went the triangle version like I did, you didn't have to use as many because you had to lay 1 on top on the square version, right? So Heather used as many cards, and sometimes if you were going really elaborate with it, you would use a whole deck of cards as the base. And so on these hill journeys, as we learned last week, that we're always going to have questions, and we're always going to question the things that are going to go on in our journeys. We realized after last week's sermon that the questions don't mean that you're any less of a follower. It actually brings you closer to God by bringing your questions to Him. But we're always going to question the things that happen on our journeys. But a lot of those answers we get to the questions, they're easier to handle with what our life's built on. So we'll have these questions, and then we'll get the answer, but it'll be easier to handle that answer if our life is built on the correct foundation. And that's probably the hardest part of this journey, is rebuilding the foundation that we had built before we became a follower. And you might say, well, why is that the hardest part? Because you're actually rebuilding your life. It's a call to change your life. So as we dive back into Luke 20, verses 9 through 18 this morning, Jesus now is talking to the same religious leaders that asked him about the authority, where his authority came from. And so he began, in verse 9, it says, and he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and let it out to tenants, and went into another country for a long while. When the time came, he sent a servant to the tenants so that they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. That makes me chuckle, because I don't know if you've been given the land to work for a certain guy, why you would do that, but they did it. And he sent another servant, but they also beat and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent yet a third. This one also they wounded and cast it out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? I will send my beloved son, perhaps they'll respect him. But when the tenants saw him, they said to themselves, this is the heir. Now, real quick, when they saw the son, they just assume that the owner had died. Because the owner probably, if it was like he was wanting his fruit, he would have come himself. So when the son came instead, they probably assumed that the owner of the vineyard was dead. And we pick back up on verse 15 or verse 13. No, verse 14. But when the tenants saw him, they said to themselves, "This is the heir, let us kill him, so that the inheritance may be ours." And they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they heard this, they said, "Surely not." But he looked directly at them and said, What then is this that is written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. Jesus again turns to a parable. He's done this quite often through Luke after he does something that, like a ministry or like he casted out all the money changers, and so he turned to a parable to get his point across, except this one wasn't as subtle as some of the others. Right? When he said that a man planted a vineyard, the religious leaders knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. They didn't have to guess. They didn't have to do this, and this is why. The vineyard, when somebody said the vineyard or the vine or the grapes back in those days, it was the way that people used to talk about the nation of Israel for a very long time. Matter of fact, going all the way back to Isaiah before the New Testament, even 400 or 500 years before the New Testament even started happening. In Isaiah 5, 1 through 7, they talked about Israel being a vineyard and being grapes and being, it was a nation. And so they knew exactly right away that they were the vine dressers. They knew they weren't the owner because they knew this before. They knew they were studiers of the Bible. So they knew right away that they were the vine dressers in the story. And understand they were just in charge of the vineyard. They didn't own the vineyard. They were just in charge of it, right? The problem they had was that the truth of the vine dressers were presented as them. The truth of this is the problem that they had, that they were mean and they were trying to keep the vineyard to themselves. It wasn't that they were mad that Jesus was talking about grapes and somebody stealing grapes. The problem they had in this, when they said surely not, was the way they were presented as the vine dressers. That the vine dressers were trying to take something that wasn't theirs. The vine dressers didn't make the vineyard, nor did they buy the vineyard. But they were allowed to work it by the owner, and that owner was God. So these religious leaders took it to heart that Jesus is saying, listen, the vine dressers killed the son. That's another foreshadowing of what's getting ready to come in the next few weeks in Luke here. And so they took that really... they got angry about it. That surely not that you look in there in verse 16 is almost them yelling, saying, this is not true. This is not what we've done, God. We've not taken the nation of Israel and tried to take it for ourselves. We were just working it for you. But here's where the problem came in. It's when they decided it was theirs. And so they would justify any mean that they could get to have it. So as we get rolling this morning, I want you to understand that and look at your own life when that they were just they wanted something, but they justified it, right? So as we're looking at these questions, I want you to kind of look at your own heart that sometimes in our life that we will want something, so we'll justify it. And we'll attach God to it. So 2 questions as we get going. Why did the owner send the son? And the second one is this. What are the dangers of building the foundation of this journey? Of us building the foundation of this journey? So why did the owner of the vineyard send the son? To collect fruit. There's something about picking fruit, like going out and actually picking fruit. We've got this little berry tree that grows out in the backyard. I cut some trees down at the beginning of March, or at the beginning of all this pandemic, and my dad's like, "Hey, you want to cut that one down?" And I was like, "No, that one's got berries on it." And I eat them throughout the summer. I don't even know what type of berries they are, so they're good. That's all I know. I want to say blackberries. I think they're blackberries, but but there's something about actually, Mom, I think they're blackberries, but there's something about picking fruit that just makes you feel earthy, like you could be on Survivor shows, like you're an earthy guy, But here's the problem I have when it comes to picking fruit. It doesn't make it back for me to use it. I eat it before I use it. I want to just eat everything that I have, right? And the reason that the landowner sent the servants and his son was to collect the fruit. Now here's who Jesus is trying to portray in this parable. First, the servants that went out were the prophets that God sent all through the Old Testament. And then God sends his son, and it was to bring the people back to God. We're the fruit in this parable. The nation of Israel was the fruit of this parable, and the owner didn't say, "Hey, go give me my prophets." The owner said, "Bring me some fruit. Bring me my fruit." And God's the owner here, and so the prophets, right? The prophets did it by word. They came and they preached, and they came and they told the nation of Israel, right? Hey, come back to God. Jesus did it by action. And notice the vine dresser's reaction to that. We're going to beat up the servants, but we're going to kill the son. And all the owner wanted was the fruit. God sent the prophets to share his word, to speak his word, so the people would repent and turn back to God. A couple weeks ago on our social media, Nicole threw out something like it was like the synopsis of the Old Testament, and it was like, God said do this, or they said save us God, and he said okay, do this, and then they said about that God, and it's just kind of the process of the Old Testament was they they just kept messing up, and God just kept sending different people, right? And so the prophets came to share the word so the people would repent and seek God. Now don't miss this. The Son, Jesus, came to heal that divide, so you no longer had to hear the word and repent. He came to heal the divide between God and us by his death, burial, and resurrection, so we can repent and now seek God ourselves. It's no longer about somebody going to get the fruit. Now the fruit can go to the owner ourselves because of what the Son did, what Jesus has done for us, so we can now seek God with our lives. John 15:4 says this, "Abide in me and I in you. A branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine. Neither can you unless you abide in me." It's what the fruit represents that can become the problem. To us, to the vine dressers, right? The fruit to God is just more people brought to him. The fruit to the vine dressers just meant more influence and power. Now here's what happened in society in that time. If there was a vine dresser and the owner went away for a long time, guess who's probably getting the profits from that fruit? The vine dresser, because the owner's way far away. But the owner in this text just wanted fruit. See, God just wants more people brought to Him with our lives. But what happens sometimes in our own life is, if we can take those people now, it builds our influence and it builds our power. But ultimately, Jesus came to bring all people back to God, not just the ones that we think deserve it, not just the ones that give us influence and power. And it really doesn't matter what I look like compared to others. Now understand this. This fruit that they're talking about, it wasn't that the owner said, go get me the best fruit and bring it back to me. He said, just go get my fruit and bring it back. He didn't say go inspect it and make sure the strongest of the strong. But here's what we'll do sometimes as a follower of Jesus. We'll surround us with people that we think are uber Christians, that are super Christians. And we'll think, man, I'm just going to get rubbed off on, and God's going to see the gold dust on me as well. And what happens with that is God doesn't really care. He just wants His people back. He just wants those people back, and He just wants the fruit. And it doesn't matter what we look like compared to somebody else. You're still fruit to God. And through Jesus' death, you have that opportunity now by yourself to go back to God. And He just wants you. He's not this just pathetic being up there just saying, hey, please come back to me. He's the creator of the world that's given you an opportunity to have the same power in you by following His Son to go get more fruit. But we like to compare ourselves. We like to say, well, that person, that's better. Man, that guy's an apple. That's a grape. Or whatever your favorite, whatever you think the best. That's the best watermelon I've ever seen. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. You get to have a relationship. And the Son came to allow that. So we can have a relationship with the owner of the vineyard, God Himself, the creator of the world. Craig D. Lonsborough says this: it has nothing to do with who I am compared to everyone else. It has everything to do who I am and companionship with God. So ultimately, the problem with the vine dressers were they wanted more influence and power. The problem with the religious leaders who are, that Jesus shows in this parable is that they wanted more influence and power, so they would hold the ones that they think were lesser than them down. Right? Because it made them look better. But really all it has to do is who you are in companionship with God. Do you follow Jesus or not? Are you collecting the fruit? There's a little, in verse 16, we kind of pop over real quick. He says, He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Now think about that for a second. The vineyard represents the people of God. The tenants represent the religious leaders. And it all represents like that law and how you can get closer to God. And He says, we're just going to destroy them and we're going to give it to other people. Now, rewind a week ago when we were talking about where they were throwing out the money changers. Or 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, where they threw out the money changers. In the outer courtyard where the outsiders were allowed to worship God. Jesus now tells them, hey, we're going to destroy the tenants. And we're going to give it to other people. We're going to give it to the people that want to give fruit to the owner. Because their companionship is where they find their value. So why did the owner send the Son? To bring the fruit back. To bring the fruit back. To bring the people back. And what are the dangers of us building the foundation of this journey? And so, in verse 18 it talks about the stone that the builders rejected became the cornerstone. During quarantine, we started watching this show a little bit before the pandemic and everything. We started watching a show called Lego Masters. One of our favorite shows. Me and Brody would watch it, and here's the thing. They would just give them a directive and be like, hey, you're going to create the craziest animated scene that you can find, or sometimes they brought Star Wars characters in, sometimes they brought all this stuff in, and they would give them like 12 hours to build these scenes, right? And we're watching this. Of course, it's not a 12-hour long show. It's just a hour-long show, so everything's compressed, right? And here's what I started noticing about this show. And the thing about this show was they would spend like 8 to 10 hours of the 12 building the foundations for their big scene, right? And they would only spend maybe 2 hours, maybe 4 hours on the things that I thought were impressive. These guys had roller coasters out of Legos and mechanics, and they had all this kind of stuff that would just, like wheels that would go, and one guy built a remote control robot. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, but they spent most of their time on this foundation and only a little bit of time on the things that I thought were impressive. This is the picture that Jesus shows when he talks about the cornerstone. So a cornerstone, the definition of a cornerstone is a stone that forms the base of a corner of a building joining two walls. So those of us that follow Jesus, we now have a new base and a cornerstone of our life. Now picture this, right? You have your old life. And your old life was just journey. It was like a wall. And then all of a sudden you meet Jesus, and now where your foundation was here now hits the cornerstone, and the other wall comes off that cornerstone. And everything should line up to that cornerstone, and all your strength should be found right there, the base of the cornerstone. Some buildings will put time capsules in their cornerstones. I know the old middle school. And everybody's like, oh, they're getting a time capsule out, and there wasn't really nothing in it, right? I don't even remember if they found it or not, right? But that cornerstone now means that you have a different wall. Doesn't mean that you lose this. It's part of your story, right? But here's what the cornerstone is now. If you follow Jesus, it's his way. It's no longer your way that's the base, that's the foundation. And this is where the battle comes. We want to set that cornerstone. We want to set the foundation that we should live by. And Jesus talks about this. Like, the builders rejected this stone, and it's now become the cornerstone. The religious leaders rejected this stone, and it's now the stone of a new faith. That's how your life should go. We want to add our righteousness and works. We want to say, Jesus, that was awesome that you died for us and you rose again. But look at what I can do. Look at this foundation I can set. Look how good I am. Look at the piece of fruit that I am compared to that. But here's what Jesus says about the cornerstone. It will either break you or it'll crush you. It'll either break you of those things, of those wanting to earn your own righteousness, or it will crush you if you hang on to them. One way or the other. And so the broken is allowed to, what he's meaning here by the cornerstone will break you into pieces. This is what Jesus is saying is, when you come to Jesus honestly, you'll be broken. Because I firmly have learned this over my life. Until I'm completely broken, I'm not going to allow God to build me up the way he wants me to with the cornerstone. It's what the Jeremy Camp, or is it Jeremy, I can't remember, the completely broken, sweetly broken song. I'm not going to sing it, right? But there's a song about that, sweetly broken. Talking about that you've got to be broken of the things, because if it was just following Jesus and still being the same person, you'll never let him lead. But ultimately, if you're trying to hang on to those things, and that's how you earn the Father's favor or the owner's favor, and you're hanging on to these things, ultimately you will be crushed in judgment one day. Crushed by the cornerstone. And that's a scary thought to think of. Because, number one, we don't want either. We don't want to be broken. We don't want to be crushed. But I'm telling you, the only way to a new life is to be completely broken. So God can build that up with Jesus' gospel as the cornerstone. You don't forget who you were, but that now becomes part of the beautiful story that God is using in your life. And our foundation now changes. Matthew 4:4 says this, "But he answered, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And you might say, well, what's that mean? What's that got to do with this, right? So Jesus is tempted, right, in the wilderness. Now, we think when we read that story in the Bible that Jesus was tempted for 40 days or he went out to the wilderness and he fasted. It means he didn't eat for 40 days. But when we think of wilderness, we think of Hocking Hills, going up on Chamberlain and walking the trails. We think of wilderness, but when you go and you research the scriptures and you see wilderness, it really means desert. So Jesus went out to the desert for 40 days. And when he finished that fasting and seeking God, Satan himself came to Jesus and he tempted him. Tempted him in a bunch of different ways. The Bible tells us that Jesus is tempted in every way that we are. Right? Every way that we've ever been tempted. And the more I read about Jesus, I totally agree. He was a man that had a lot of people following him, so he was tempted probably in every way. But Satan himself tempted him. And at this moment, this was one of the tempting. He was hungry. And Satan said, hey, if you're the Son of God, turn that stone into bread and eat it. And Jesus answers that by saying, listen, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that comes out of the mouth of God. His foundation was different. His cornerstone was different. He knew that temptation was going to come, but because of his foundation, he knew that he didn't have to use his power just to show it over the devil so he could get something to eat. His power wasn't meant for that. These vine dressers, they just wanted the power so they could hoard it over people, but Jesus' power wasn't for him to eat. But his foundation was the Word of God. And here's what temptation is. Temptation is simply Satan trying to get you to build your cornerstone on something else. I'm just human. That's just Satan saying, this is your foundation. Well, it was just a white lie. That's Satan resetting your foundation. That cornerstone, he's trying to reset that cornerstone because here's the thing. He cannot take away what the Son did for us. He cannot take away what Jesus did for us, but here's what he can do. He can realign your cornerstone and he can make life really hard for you. So when the other people that don't have that relationship with Jesus, guess what? They just see, oh man, he just keeps stumbling around. He just wants to readjust it a little bit. And from my understanding, I'm not a great builder, but if that cornerstone isn't exactly aligned, the whole building's off. You might say, well, Eric, temptation's on everybody. What can we do for temptation? I believe there's three things, and I don't usually have just three things. That's not usually my style, but these are three things that I'm trying to do in my own life. I'm trying to do with my own kids. Because it's a daily battle when I watch my 13-year-old and I watch my 10-year-old try to live this life of following Jesus, and it seems like their cornerstone's being shifted daily. And so three things and three daily things that I've tried to do in my life lately is daily devotionals. Not just reading the Bible, but finding a devotional. I've went through Paul Tripp's New Morning Mercies a couple times. I'll get on my Bible app. The Bible app has so many for whatever you need in your life. Just go to YouVersion, download it, log in, and just type in something that you're struggling with, and there will be probably a 5-day daily devotional that you can go through. And guess what? You can do it with a friend. And you might say, well, I don't even know anybody that has that app. I have it, so search my name. I will go through that with you. So a daily devotional will help keep that cornerstone aligned to where it needs to be. The second is daily prayer. I'm not just talking about the rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub type prayer before meals. I'm not just thinking about going to bed with your kids and saying, hey, protect us. I pray with my kids every night. I'm ashamed to say I don't pray with my wife every night. I pray for my wife every day, but I don't pray with my wife every day. And so I developed that habit of praying with my kids. But the major problem comes in that I don't really have a daily prayer, like Jesus says here. You shouldn't live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. I don't seek God daily in my prayers and say, God, I need your strength today. And the third daily thing is, have a daily connection. Jesus was all alone in the wilderness, and he could still fight it off, but he was still tempted. The Son of God, the best human that's ever lived on this earth, was still tempted. And after he got done with that, he went and he called 12 guys. You need a daily connection in your life. It could be your spouse. But I would challenge you to even step even further and find a friend, even if it's texting or calling. Because what will happen when, especially people in my life stage, is you have kids and now your life becomes about your kids, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I've lost connection with people. So a daily devotional, daily prayer, and a daily connection will help you keep that cornerstone aligned to where it needs to be. I'm going to ask Amber to come back up, and I keep using this term week in and week out. We need to fight for those times in our lives. It's a fight. If you think it's just a gentle battle, it's a fight. You've got to fight for these times in our life. And you've got to be willing to let others fight with you. You can't do it alone. We were never meant to do it alone. And here's the thing, when these things start attacking us and these questions start attacking us, and they start filling our brain, you can bring those questions to the cornerstone and find the answers. So my two questions as I end. First is this: is it time for you to follow Jesus? Have you felt the Father calling you? Is it time? It's a hard decision, but yet it's also a simple decision to make. Because when you feel that tug, all you really got to do is say, I'm sorry, God, for what I've done. I know what you did on the cross, and I know you rose again to forgive me my sins, and I'm asking for that right now. Forgive me. And just say, I'm ready to follow you. And if that's you this morning, get a hold of me. Send me a message. And we'll talk that out. Because ultimately, following Jesus doesn't mean you're on your path alone. You're together. The second question is simply this. Right now, this exact moment in your life, what is your cornerstone? What are you aligning everything about your life on? Is it the one you follow? Or is it something else? So when we look at this parable, and we look at the questions that we have in our life, listen, the questions don't change the cornerstone. The cornerstone's still the cornerstone. It's what we want to do with the questions that can change the alignment. And these vine dressers decided they wanted the power. So their alignment got changed. So what is your cornerstone? Because that will lead you back. That every decision that you make right now will lead you to that cornerstone. So fight hard for that cornerstone of God. Father, we thank you so much for your love, your grace, your mercy. Lord, we thank you for an opportunity to worship in technology and the ways that we've been able to do this. So Lord, here's what I ask this morning for that one that is ready to align his life with the cornerstone, that fruit that's ready to come back to you, that this morning they make that decision. And for people like me that has adjusted their cornerstone, let us turn from that. Let us go back and let us continually to fight to keep our eyes level and straight on that cornerstone. Let us daily read our Bible. Let us daily pray, and let us daily seek connections with other believers. Lord, I thank you so much for Church in the Village, for the people that fight for that here at Church in the Village. Use this time for however you want. We ask this in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so kind to me. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
We thank you again for joining us this morning. Now remember, this week we do have our midweek check-in. We'll send out that Zoom code. Here in the next couple weeks, we're going to try to maybe do just a meal. Try to keep it kind of socially distanced as we possibly can. If you would think about maybe even wanting to host a few people over at your house for a meal, that way we can kind of do it everywhere. Just get a hold of us and do that. Again, happy Father's Day to all the fathers. When we meet the next time, I know mothers, we told you we're going to have something special for you, and we didn't that Sunday. We're going to try to have something for you next Sunday so we can celebrate you, and also the mothers, because we owe you a little something as well. And I pray that you have a fantastic week, and we look forward to seeing you next week live.